Okay, everybody, welcome or welcome back to the Virtual Digital Humanities Center here at San Diego State University for our second tool refresher event, this time focusing on mapping. I'm Dr. Pam Lach, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Digital Humanities Librarian here at San Diego State, where I direct our DH Center and I co-direct our Digital Humanities Initiative. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to read the San Diego State University Land Acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. And I'll put the link to our land acknowledgement in chat for anyone who is interested. If you are joining us from somewhere other than San Diego, encourage you to share where you're Zooming from. And if you're not sure, you can look it up on this website, which is not 100% comprehensive. And feel free to introduce yourselves in chat. And I'll do my best to keep up with the chat. So some of you attended our first tool refresher. Thanks so much for coming back. And for some of you, this is your first time joining us. Welcome. Glad to have you here. All of the resources for this tool refresher workshop series are available at this tiny URL that I just put in chat. These are not formal workshops. These are informal tool refreshers and explorations. So unlike other workshops that I've done in the past, I don't have formal slides prepared. Instead, I'll walk you through a tool, do a live demo, give you a chance to practice, and talk about some alternatives as well. This is all posted on that tiny URL, but just for some additional information, I'm going to put some links in chat to our DH Center, to the DH Initiative, to all of the virtual events that are coming up this semester, and that program, that teachdh.sdsu.edu programming page also has links to recordings from our virtual events from last year as well. So if there's anything that you missed that you're interested in, you can always go back and view it at another time. And I've also included the link to, the YouTube link did not actually come through. Let me put that in as well. There we go. Okay, so last time we looked at a timeline tool called TimelineJS, which was created by a group at Northwestern called the Knight Lab, which started out as a set of tools for assisting journalists in telling data-driven stories. But a lot of the tools that Knight Lab has been creating since they first launched TimelineJS have really had broader appeal than perhaps they necessarily intended. And a lot of digital humanists use a lot of these tools as well. So we are going to look at another tool that the Knight Lab has created, this one called StoryMapJS. Which, let me get the link. I apologize. I feel like I'm on the brink of a sneeze at any given second. So if I suddenly mute myself and turn off my camera, that's why. I don't want to sneeze on camera. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And hopefully y'all can see this set of links in this Google Doc. So I'm going to pull up StoryMap. And I'm actually going to start by showing you what it looks like on what we call the front end, which is to say what you can do with StoryMapJS. This is a map that I created many, many years ago as a way to learn the tool before I taught it for the first time. So what you'll see is there's sort of a landing page with an overview of the map. This is sort of calibrated here to show a sort of snapshot of all of the markers. And when you first land on a story map, you're basically seeing a summary of all the points on the map. And you can begin to actually make some guesses about the story that that map is telling, right? Like if you look at this, you're only seeing markers in the continental United States, coupled with a title, a story of the places that shaped me. You can begin to surmise that this is a map of places that I've been, and that those places are largely limited to the United States, or places that have been influential in my life. And so you can already start to sort of tease out a little bit of an argument there. And then you can either scroll along using the slider that looks very similar to the timeline slider, where you'll see an image and some text, and zooming in onto the map. Folks can see the map, right? Okay, I got a pop-up alert saying there was maybe an issue. So you'll see there's an image. You can see I can embed video in here. I will not play this because it's an earworm. You can put GIFs in. This is a live Google Street View of where I did my graduate work at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So it's very interactive. More video. So you can see that you can put in a lot of multimedia to embed into your map. And this enables you to tell a story about places. So what you can basically do is tell a sequential story about a series of geographic locations, limited to or as broad as the entire Earth. So I can, there is a way to zoom in and out of the map. Oh, I'm not seeing that here. Or I could go back to the beginning. You'll notice too, perhaps, oh, I just zoom in, double click in, that I can change the look of the pinpoints or the markers on that map. And we'll go over all of this in this series. So again, lots of different kind of content. And I can also jump around in a non-sequential way if I choose, by just clicking on different markers and then panning and scrolling as I need to on the map. And if I ever get lost, I can do a map overview, or I can go back to the beginning here. So it's a really lovely tool, and like Timeline.js, it's optimized for many different kinds of devices and operating systems, and it displays really nicely on a smartphone and tablet as well. So what do you need to make your own story map? Well, first you need a story that has some geographic or spatial component to it. This is a tool that requires some sort of geographic information. And I'll show another tool later on in this session that has a similar name that does not have the same requirement for a geospatial component. But in this particular case, it does. And so you need to have a set of locations, and you need to have some information about those locations. If you have media, whether it's a static image or audio file or video file or anything like that, so much the better, but it's not required for this tool. But it does help you tell a sort of layered story about some set of things. As another example, this is a map that I worked on with the Ancient Rome class, History 503 from spring 2019 with Dr. Beth Pollard. And some of you who were here last time will remember I showed several examples of from her class. And what was really neat about this is what we were able to do was take an image of the map of, just do a slightly, here we go. Take an image of an ancient map of Rome, the city. I engaged in a sort of lightweight process of essentially georectifying it. And essentially what that means is this is not the official way that one would do this for GIS work, but I essentially turned a static image into a map by tiling it using Photoshop and then putting it on a web server so that we could effectively use it as a map. Now, it is not actually tied to geographic information. So normally when we do georectification, we take a static image, we tie what's called tiling it, where we boil it down to lots of different sort of pixels, and then we tie those to geographic places through latitude and longitude. In this case, I'm not actually doing that. This tool is not that sophisticated. But all that to say, you can take an image, and it can really be any kind of image, and you can do that to use it as what's called your base map, rather than actually using an actual spatial map. So it's a really nice way. Let's say you have an illustration that you want to annotate. You could potentially use this tool to do that and sort of circumvent all of the spatial components. And essentially what you would do is just navigate your image to pinpoint where you want different things to be annotated. And then you would consider, maybe customizing the marker so that it doesn't look like a map. But essentially what we did here was students in this class were each assigned a location that they had to do a little research on. And this map actually is telling the story of the building of Rome. Excuse me one moment. And so we put the locations in a very particular order in order to make a spatial argument about how Rome as a city actually developed. Which is to say that there was a geographic and spatial logic to the growth of the city over time. I am not a Roman historian, so I don't actually remember what that logic was, but there was a very distinct logic. And so you can see we're traversing this ancient map. Now we could have just done this using a map, the sort of built-in map of Rome, but we chose to use an ancient map instead, and it was really fun to figure out how to do that. And StoryMapJS will tell you how to do that if you're interested. Okay, now that I've shown you that, I'm going to actually dive into what this tool does and how it functions. And then we'll give you time to practice. And then I'll also show you another tool as an alternative. So when you go, all right, always have too many tabs open on my computer. Okay, when you go to StoryMapJS, just like TimelineJS, it's going to look like this, where you'll have an overview, examples, you'll have some advanced information. This is where you could learn how to create your own, what's called a gigapixel story map. And that's essentially what I did for ancient Rome. Oops. In our case, we're going to click the Make a Story Map. Now, if you remember from TimelineJS, what that would do is open up a template spreadsheet that you would copy to your own Google Drive. And if you didn't have a Google account, you could use you could have someone create a template for you to use without you having to log in. And you could work collaboratively on the same spreadsheet. Differently, StoryMapJS is tied to a single Gmail address. So if you don't have a Gmail address, you can't actually use it. Similarly, if you're trying to use StoryMapJS collaboratively, you can't do that because only one person can, a map can only be tied to a single account, and you wouldn't want to share your login credentials with someone else to let them log into the map. So over the years, we've developed a few workarounds for this, but really this is meant for more solo authored work. But when you're ready, you'll click the Make a Story Map. Now, in my case, I'm already logged in. In y'all's cases, if this is the first time you're using it, you'll need to actually log in, and it'll ask you to log in with your Gmail address. Here at San Diego State, our email is run by Gmail, so I can just use my SDSU email account. If our email was tied to another system, then I would use my personal Gmail, or I would create a new one. And in the past, when we've had teams working together, we often create like a team Gmail account with a shared set of password that, we aren't tied to anyone's individual password, so that we're not breaching security or anything like that. So once you're logged in, you'll see all of the maps that you've got. In your case, if this is the first time you're using it, you won't see anything here other than the new. In my case, you can see a whole bunch of different maps. Some were tests that I did in partnership with with other researchers as we were testing different features to see whether it would work either for a research project or for their class. And some are actual silly tests that I was just testing out 1 or 2 features. This is the map that I showed you. This one here. So I can go in at any time once I've created the map, and I can update it, I can change it, and I can add to it. And at any given point, what you're going to see is a sort of template. It kind of almost looks like a PowerPoint slide, but with a few little fields that you would just fill in. So there'll always be a geographic component, with the one exception being the title slide. And that's the equivalent of this, because the title slide is an aggregation of all of your points on the map. It doesn't need to be tied to any one specific geographic location. And this is similar to how TimelineJS works, where the first slide is an overview slide. It doesn't have to live anywhere in time. So this doesn't live anywhere in space. But once you get beyond that, you'll see here, you can jump around to any of the slides, and then you'll see that there's a bar where you can enter your location. In theory, you can put in a place name like San Diego, California, or you could put in latitude and longitude coordinates. I've had students attempt to do the latitude longitude in the past, and it's not always worked. And it's important to have the right format, which is lat colon and then the latitude, long colon the longitude. And if you forget to label it lat long, it won't work. But if you have location data based on that instead of by place name, you can do that. And then what you would do is give it a title. You would put some information in, and then you could add objects to that. So I'm going to go to the end and show you what that looks like. So here I had started doing this. And I think this is San Diego, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to put Balboa Park. And you'll see as I start typing that it's giving me specific suggestions. And so here's Balboa Park. And I can take my marker and I can move it around to place it exactly where I want. I can zoom in. Oops. I can zoom in if I want to get very precise. So let's say I want to put it right here. I can do that. And then I can change the zoom level as I want for when someone first lands on the slide, if I want to be more or less zoomed in. So for instance, here's how zoomed in I am. If I wanted it to be more zoomed in, I could sort of set that and reframe that. So then I can put information in. I can put some paragraphs in. This is just Doggo Ipsum text generator. You'll see that there is a lightweight, what we call a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get, where I can do bold, italics, I can put links in, and I can look at the source code. But for anyone who knows HTML, you'll see that the HTML looks a little bit different than what you might have put in if you had hand coded it. So for me, I would have probably done paragraph breaks instead of div, but either way, it still works. So if you want to hand code some HTML, you can do it. It can sometimes be a little bit buggy. And then I can put an image in. So I can either find an image or a YouTube video or something by putting a URL in, or I can upload directly. So unlike TimelineJS, where everything needs to live online, in StoryMapJS, I can actually manually load an image by going to my oops. I always use pictures of my pups. And this is the one I just loaded, which is really adorable. And I can click upload. I'll get a preview to make sure that it works. And I can give a credit. And this is, then I can give it a caption. And as it always seems to be the case whenever you're typing in front of other people, you will make a million typos. And if that's what, and then there I have it. There I've added this little guy. I can preview it in real time and see what it's going to look like. I'm noticing that the map is not previewing properly. Don't worry about that. Sometimes the map doesn't preview the way we want it to. I can also do a couple other things. So for instance, I can change how the marker looks by using one of the images I've already uploaded or picking another one. So for instance, if I want another icon or another image of Pablo, I can do that. And now we can see a different one. You can't, this one's so zoomed out, you can't really see, it's not really a good option. So what I would rather do is pick one that's kind of an up close. This would probably be better. There we go. And you can see it in real time. I can also change the background. If I want to use a color in the background, I can. Or if I want to use a file, use another image, I can do that as well. And now you can see that there is an image over the text. I can still see the map though. And again, I don't worry about the fact that that the map is not very zoomed in at that point. If I like everything, I can, you'll see that it automatically saves my work, but this will not be viewable on the public facing map until I publish those changes. So it's not there until I hit publish. And if I don't want to publish those changes, I don't have to. Now, if I close this out and then go back to it, what I'll see is that that slide is still there, that place. But again, it is not viewable until I've hit publish. Just checking chat to see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any yet, so I'm going to keep going. I want to show a couple other things, but I'm going to go into one of my tests to do this because I don't actually want to publish those changes. Just take a look at this one. So here is another test map that I was creating as a demo. And again, you'll see that this one doesn't have as much information in it. You'll see that I've placed one thing here, and you'll see that I'm using a different, what's called a different base map. And if I wanted to change my base maps, I would go into options, and I could change to what I was using before, or I could go and use OpenStreetMaps, which is a very commonly used one. Some of the base maps years ago were a little buggy, so I learned to avoid some of them. You can use anything you like. And then if you wanted to use your own image, instead, you would use that gigapixel option, which you would then have to follow the directions to learn how to use that. And I'm not going to show that today. Then you could customize each of your locations. And then I see a question coming in about copyright. So Night Lab, the group that made this tool, is interested in making the tool. It's up to you as the user to be mindful of copyright and making sure that you're using images or video that are in the public domain, or for which you have copyright usage, in which case you would list that in your credit or your caption. So Night Lab does not make any restrictions on what you can upload in terms of an image. That is up to you to be mindful of. And copyright laws will vary depending on where you are and what the content is. And as I say to everyone, I am not a lawyer or a copyright expert, so I cannot advise on the legality of this image versus that image. But if you are trying to do, use images that are not your own, what you'd want to do when you do an image search is try to constrain that image search to looking for things in the public domain. So on Google, the way that you would do this is type in something. I always type puppy. And then under image search, you would, oops, I keep changing this, constrain to what we would call Creative Commons. Different search engines are going to call it something else, free to reuse, public domain, in this case, Creative Commons. In theory, these images are all free to use. If you're trying to use archival images that have been digitized, you would need to clear that with the archive or the institution that you're working with. So you would want to be very mindful of that, and it's the user's responsibility to do that. But thanks for that question. I really appreciate that. A couple other things I want to point out before I let you give it a try. You can rearrange your slides at any point. So you can just drag and drop them, similar to how you would with Google Slides or with PowerPoint, using that sort of sidebar. And you can delete things that you want to delete. So here, this has nothing in it. I could actually just get rid of it. And if I want to add a new slide, I could very easily do that. And again, I can put information in. So let's say I want to put this in Santa Cruz, because I see we have someone here from Santa Cruz. I can just put Santa Cruz, California, or I could try to be more specific. University of California, Santa Cruz. And you'll see there's a lot of options here, but not this specific one. So I might just go back to saying Santa Cruz, California. But here's the university. It just happened to put me near the university. I can drag that marker over to UCSC. Put some text in there. I'm just using fake text. I can put an image, or let's say I want to put a video in. Oops, I could go to YouTube. I could find, oops. I could grab that share link. When I click away, I should see a preview. This is a really lovely way to let me know that what I'm doing is actually working. There might be a limit in terms of the actual size of the image that you can upload, in which case, as long as you're not doing like a TIFF file, a .tiff, you should be okay. If it's too big, StoryMapJS will tell you this file is too big, cannot exceed such and such size. And then you would just have to go in and resize it using some sort of tool. If you're a Mac user, you could do it in Preview. If you're a Windows user, you could do it in Paint or 3D Paint. Or if you have access to Photoshop, you could do it there as well. In terms of the maps, this is drawing from open maps that are free to use. So you wouldn't be able to you wouldn't necessarily need to configure the map. If you wanted to create your own custom gigapixel map, then you would want to follow the advice on the documentation, which will tell you what size, what resolution you need, and all of that stuff. I'm not seeing it right now. Here we go, gigapixel. Oh, this is actually not the right documentation. Here we go. Sorry about that. Some people have had issues with Dropbox. You'll always want to look at those frequently asked questions. How do you adjust the zoom? Things like that. You can even create links to link to a specific slide. I'm not seeing the information about gigapixel. I do have that documentation somewhere, but not at the ready. So I will add it to the resource sheet after this workshop. One person asks, have I tested this with different languages? I have not, but as with other tools, this platform is in many ways language agnostic. I could put pretty much any language in here that I wanted. In theory, I should be able to preserve accent marks and things like that. Anything that what we would describe as UTF-8 or UTF, I think UTF-8 is the most standard. So in theory, this should be able to do all of that. So the question is where to get the maps. I did not actually indicate where you can get these maps from. If you have your own map or you have a static image that you want to use, you can do that. You can't just upload your own map though. Well, there is a custom. Actually, scratch that. If there is a map that has been what we would call geo-rectified, that is on a geo server, in theory, you could use, actually, no, I'm going to walk that back again. That's how you would normally do that in GIS. In this case, this is an image. Okay, it's a little too complex for this workshop. What I will say is there are ways to pull maps from other places. What I'm seeing here, if you can see this URL, it is an image file, but the ZXY just at the end of that URL indicates that there's some geo-rectification that has happened there. There is documentation for that. Generally, though, this tool is really designed for folks who aren't using custom maps. If you want to use custom maps, you probably need to use something that's a little bit more robust than StoryMapJS. And I will show you an example of that in a moment. This is really for folks who don't know a lot about geographic information systems or GIS, folks who want to do some mapping, but don't want to learn anything other than that. But to clarify, what you can do is choose any of the existing built-in maps. So OpenStreetMaps is one of the default map bases you can choose. Or you can do a black and white one. There's just a few built-in ones. If you don't want to have a lot of detail, the watercolor one is really nice. And then the OpenStreetMap standard is really nice as well. So I hope that clarifies your questions. Okay, so here I have some information, and then I can preview it. And again, it's not fully zoomed in, but I know it's okay. And I could go ahead and publish this. And if I do that, I can then hit the share button. And now I have a whole URL for my map that I can look at. And this isn't going to be a very interesting map. But here's the one I just added with Santa Cruz. And if I start this, you'll actually see the recording in the map, which is really, really cool. So again, what I did was I pulled the URL. I can also embed it through, social media. I can put a description in. So if I wanted to post it directly through the social buttons, the description would show up, and I can create a featured image. These are all of the images I've uploaded to this particular story map, not to all of my story maps. Or I could put a different one up. And if I wanted to embed this in another website, I would just grab the HTML, this iframe HTML, and put it somewhere else. And I could even customize the width and the height. I can do that here, or manually, if I change this to 50%, you'll see it changes in the code as well. So again, things that we can do, we can place markers, we can add text, images, or other multimedia. We can configure our marker either using images we've already loaded or adding a new one, or configure the background images, either changing the color using hex code. And I would just use a hex color picker to do that. I'm just randomly Googling for a color picker, finding a color that I like. And then I'll just copy that hex code. Or I could just sort of manually look for a color that I like here. Let's say that's what I want. And there it is. Or I could put an image as the background. So those are the things that you can do. And again, just a reminder of the things you can't do. You can't collaborate in real time with a story map because it's tied to a single Gmail account. We have found with students who were working collaboratively in story maps where they would create a shared Gmail address and then a shared password, that the one issue is if you're going to do something like that, if one person is logged in and then doesn't log out and another student logs in on another computer, then you'll overwrite the changes in the last session. So if you're going to be working collaboratively in a story map, what you need to do is coordinate. Okay, I've logged out, it's time for you to log in, and now you can do your work. And when you're done, you need to log out, and then I can log back in. If you don't do that, then you can potentially lose some of your work. So as with other tools, pretty much every tool, what you probably want to do is draft all of your content outside of the tool. So we typically will do things in Google Docs or in Word Docs, write all my narrative, indicate my locations, figure out my images or my video, and then when I'm ready, copy and paste it in. And this way, if the tool crashes while I'm making it, I don't have to worry about losing my map or anything like that. Also, because this text box is small, and unlike other text boxes where I can change the size of them, and I know I can do that based on this little box here with the two or three diagonal lines, this does not have that option. So I'm forced to scroll, but I can't actually change the size of the text box to be able to read all of my text at once. That would make editing very difficult. You'll also notice that this text, there's no spell check. Oh, there is spell check if I'm clicked in the box. So at least there are some checks and balances there, but it's not going to catch everything. You'd want to run things through a proper spell check. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, while we're waiting to see if anyone adds anything in chat, what I would invite you to do now is, oh, here's a question, not exactly, but unrelated. Can we superimpose an older map on Google Map in order to show how places might have shifted or changed? Really lovely question. That would be very hard to do in StoryMap, but not impossible. And there's a couple ways you could attempt to do it. One would be to try to use the newer map as or the older map as your background option. But again, when we do that, hang on, let me go back. If I were to do that and use another image, it would only cover half of the map. So there are ways to do that, or you could try to do something like this. This is another tool that I have actually embedded in my story map called Juxtapose, where I've taken an old photo of Scripps Cottage here on San Diego State's campus. And I took, this used to be where the library is now. It was moved in the 60s to build our library. And what I was attempting to do was do a sort of before and after. I couldn't quite get the perspective right. So this is an image I actually took myself. And I can tell because there's a little bit of what we call the open air theater in the background. You can see a little bit of it, the stadium. And so what I did here was I did that using another tool called Juxtapose, which we're not going to cover today. And then I took the HTML code from that and put it in my story map. So that was sort of my workaround for doing that. Again, this is not a super high powered tool. This is a really great entry tool for people who want to tell a spatial story, but don't want to do a lot of geographic information system or GIS work. So it's non-technical. All you really need to know is how to traverse a map with your mouse the way you would Google Maps or other apps or other mapping websites. Anything more sophisticated than that, you probably want to look at some other tools. To that end, I do want to show you one other tool. But what I want to invite you to do right now, sorry, I have too many things up on my browser, is for those of you who have a Gmail account and are comfortable experimenting, go ahead and log into StoryMap and try to create a map. It doesn't have to be anything real content, anything like that. It can be a total test. But if you want to do that, go ahead and do that. And then you can put the URL to the map into chat when you're ready, and we could all take a look at it. While you're doing that, I want to show you another option. Okay. For folks who want to get a little bit more powerful, there's nothing more powerful that I'm aware of than the products that ESRI or Esri makes. Esri, as I understand it, is located here in San Diego, and it's the leader in geographic information systems. These are very high-tech mapping platforms that are combining a lot of different spatial data together. Stuff from the USGS, as well as you can take historic photos, historic maps, historic photos, overlay them onto maps, and you can do what Ravender is asking about with sort of creating these map layers where you have different levels of transparency and you could really see a lot of things all at once. Now, Esri makes a suite of tools, the most famous of which is ArcGIS, which is not cheap. But many institutions have an institutional subscription to the suite of tools. There is an ArcGIS online public version as well. We're not going to go into ArcGIS because I am not trained in sophisticated GIS. But one of the things that's really cool that Esri has been working on is more accessible tools for mapping. And they created a tool several years ago called StoryMaps. The name is very similar to StoryMapJS, so I always get confused between the two. So StoryMapJS is what we've been working on today. StoryMaps is this other product that allows you to create some really interesting maps. I'm going to show one that a student here did several years ago for a class on the Black urban experience. Each student in the class studied a city and created a thematic map or story map about that place. What's really interesting about story maps is that you do not have to have, it doesn't have to have anything spatial about it. It can be completely non-map based. It's all about the story. This is the older version of StoryMapJS. It looks a little bit, I'm sorry, Story Maps, and it looks a little bit different now, but essentially you scroll around and you have a different featured media, whether it's a map, an image, a video, or something else. And then you can have lots of other images in here as well. And you can tell a story. And similar to StoryMapJS, you can jump around using the navigation here. But this is a really lovely tool if you can access it, because it doesn't require you to have a map location for everything. So if you are trying to tell a story, but you don't know where everything lives on a map, this is a really lovely tool. It looks really clean. It's really, really powerful. It's pretty user-friendly and intuitive. Students really like it. And it produces really clean story maps. Again, the emphasis is on the story, not the map part, with lots of media that can tell stories. Here's an example. Each student was required to do one data-driven map. So here is a map that this student made of median household income mapped to the Black population of Detroit in 2019. So what she's doing is taking some census data, different kinds of census data, and putting it together on the map. This is all built into the Esri product. And this is part of what makes it so powerful, where you can layer a lot of different data together in order to tell a very rich story that may be place-based in this case. It doesn't have to be, though. And then it's interactive, so you can get information about it. And all of this can be done in the Esri suite of tools. Now, if, and there's lots of examples here, including story maps made by folks at UCLA, Mapping Indigenous LA, where classes were and communities were coming together to create alternative maps to our dominant English US-centric map to tell different stories about LA based on Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous experience, Indigenous heritage. There's also this great map that folks here in geography did last year about the impacts of COVID-19 on the SDSU community. A really lovely map. If you have institutional access, you can log in through your institution to use story maps. If not, there is a public version here that you can use, that you can create an account for. I'm going to go into the SDSU version. And I'm already logged in. And I can see that there are maps that have been created in my institution that I can see. These are not necessarily public maps, though some of them are. And I can go to Story Maps. It's an app in this suite of tools. And this is what the newer version of Story Maps looks like. This is a sort of new updated version that was beta up until about a few months ago, where I can create content. It looks kind of similar. Here are all the different points I've created. Here I've embedded a timeline from last year in using just HTML embed code that was provided to me when I created the timeline. Again, I can put a GIF in. Here is a map that I created, and I'll show that in just a moment. I can put images in. And here's another map with layered data. This is a map I created in a training last summer with data that was given to me about Black Lives Matter protests in New York City in the summer of 2020. And I can create more content. I can add media. I was having trouble the other day adding YouTube videos. I kept getting error messages, but I can add embed code. I can add images and maps. If I wanted to add a map, I've been having a little bit of trouble with this tool. It keeps bumping me back to the last slide. If I wanted to add a map, it would show me all the maps that I've previously created, or I could create a new, what's called an express map. And I can use the data that's built into this product to be able to make that sort of layered map, or I could do a map like this, where I just was playing around with different kinds of markup, markers, polygons, and lines. These are very typical types of objects that we would overlay onto maps to be able to call out particular information in a map. And if I'm done, I would just place the map in my story map. Whoops. And so there it is. And so I've actually put it in twice. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions about StoryMapJS or the Esri Story Maps product. And again, I apologize for the confusion. The names are practically identical, and I'm always tripping up between the two of them. Just trying to check and see if there are any questions. Let me scroll chat and make sure I haven't missed anything. Is anybody giving StoryMapJS a try right now? Yeah. Oh, cool. Oh, awesome. When you're ready, if you do want to share a link, or I can give over screen sharing rights if you want to share just what you have on your screen. We can do it either way. If you publish your story map, the only people who will see it are people who have the actual URL. It's not going to just be sort of out there in the middle of, for everyone to see. And for those of you who are playing with StoryMapJS right now, are there any issues arising for you or problems that you're having while you're playing with it? I'm sure I forgot to cover something or other. Yeah, good question about how safe is it to sign in with your Google account to this product? That is a really good question, and I can't give you a 100% answer. I don't know for sure. And it's something that I think about a lot and I'm concerned about a lot. I think it's probably a good idea, especially if you're not sure or you don't feel comfortable, to create a fake Gmail address to do that. So one that is not tied to any of your existing passwords or any of your data. That would be the safest way to do this, so that if, God forbid, NightLab got hacked, your information would be okay. I probably should have done that years ago. I first started using StoryMapJS before I was terribly aware of or concerned about data privacy and surveillance issues. And if I had it all to do over again, that's how I would have done it. So I would have created a fake account and only done StoryMapJS through that. It is something to definitely think about. And it is something that gives me pause when I use it in instruction, because unlike Timeline.js, where I can create a spreadsheet for someone to use without having to sign into anything Google, just by letting them edit it anonymously, with StoryMapJS, I can't do that. And so I'm pushing students into Google in order to use this tool. And I'm not comfortable doing that, especially if there are students who are concerned about their privacy for good reason. It's part of why I do like to give alternatives. NightLab is affiliated with Northwestern University in Chicago, or just outside of Chicago. It is not a governmental institution. But universities, while they have, most universities have good IT security, nothing's 100%. So that's with any tool that you're using. So as with anything you're doing online, you always want to be careful. You don't want to reuse passwords for anything. You always want to use different passwords for every account, even though that's hard to manage. It's the safest way to do it. Whenever possible, you want to use multi-factor authentication or dual authentication. NightLab does not allow that. It doesn't support that, I should say. But whenever possible, you want to do that. Other questions, things that folks are experiencing with StoryMapJS? Evan's got his. Let's take a look. A few of my favorite beaches in California. Awesome. So I can either click this arrow or I can click the Start Exploring, and you can even customize the language of the Start Exploring if you wanted to and have it say something else. So here's Laguna Beach. Awesome. I don't know where this is. Refugio. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Beautiful though. White Sands Beach. Great. Now in this case, I see that Evan's pulling images from Flickr. And if you're doing something like that, you want to just double check that if there's usage statements in Flickr, you want to try as much as possible to use images that are free to use. And Evan, it's perfect, right? You don't need to do anything more than this just to get a feel for the tool itself. So you got a feel for what it's like to add images, to place the markers, things like that. And that's all you need to do for this. So thank you. If you do, I forgot to show this, but if you do want to customize that Start Exploring button, I believe that's under Options. Where is that? Oh, Call to Actions, right? Sometimes it's like right in front of my face. So here, the call to action defaults to Start Exploring, or I can change it though. And if I say dive into my map, and I look at this now, oops, what did I do wrong? I didn't copy the whole URL. Oops. All right, so what did I do? I copied the wrong thing. What have I done here? Oh, haha, I copied the wrong URL. Copy. Okay, here we go. See, now it says dive into my map. That's that call to action button. So you can change that and customize that. So we had students in the ancient Rome class making their own maps. Some of them actually customized this, put it in Latin, let's say, instead of start exploring, or did something more custom to the theme of their map. And I think that one of the strengths of this tool is being able to create a thematic map, right? So it's something where everything has some coherence to it. Because it's sequential, you can try to create a sort of map that combines time and space. There's no temporal aspect to these maps, but a lot of historians in particular like to do time and space together, because we don't experience space without time or time without space. If you were to do it that way, what you'd want to do is just make sure that the way that you organize your slides or your markers is in some sort of chronological way. And that way you could potentially do a chronological spatial map, in which case I would recommend that in the headline, the title of the marker, you put the date, because there's nothing that's going to indicate time in that map. So it's one of these workarounds for how to create a temporal spatial visualization, because this is really just spatial. The timeline that we worked with 2 weeks ago was just temporal, but you can do these kinds of workarounds in that respect. Okay, I see that we only have about 2 minutes left. I just want to see if there are any last questions or anything before I stop the recording. Oh, we have one more map. All right, I have to share this.
Sorry, I did it very slowly.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's great. Thank you. Let me see what you came up with. Oh, the redwoods. Yes. Perfect. I know where this is. This is Henry Cowell, right?
Yeah, I don't move there yet. I just got on the job.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I will move to California soon.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you. So I do have a question about story. No, I think my question is, I have to click share button to see the URL of my story map and share it to the public.
Yes.
Oh.
And so what you have to do is publish it, and then you'd click that share. Let me go back to screen sharing. Go back to mine. Yeah, so I don't have any changes to publish. So when I hit the share button, here's where I get that URL. I can publish changes that I haven't saved my changes, so I could do that. This would be the full URL. Now it's an ugly URL. It's long. I often create a tiny URL for the ugly URL. And then if I go down further, this is where I would get my embed code if I wanted to embed this in another website. And what that would look like, and I should have shown you all this from the beginning. Here's an example of that. Where I've taken the embed code for that ancient Rome map and embedded it in another website. And then I created a tiny URL just to make it look a little cleaner.
Okay, what if after I share the URL with you, and then I add some new pictures into that, so you will see the latest update in that URL too?
Provided that you publish the changes.
Yep.
And if let's say I'm looking at your map and you publish those changes, I would have to refresh my browser to be able to see those changes. But yeah, once you publish it, that URL won't change.
Oh, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my next question is, ArcGIS story map definitely looks more powerful than StoryMapJS. My question is, ArcGIS is very expensive. Some institutions have it, some don't. So for those public accounts of StoryMap ArcGIS, is there any difference between this public account and those paid service?
Yes, there definitely typically are differences between the institutional account and the free public one. I don't have a rundown, but usually the public versions are a little more stripped down. What that might mean for StoryMapJS, story maps, is that there might be less data that you can draw on. But in theory, you should still be able to upload content, media, things like that. You just might have a few limitations in terms of the mapping capabilities of it. But it will still be pretty powerful though. I think I used the free version many, many years ago. It's hard for me. I can't actually, because I have an institutional account, I can't see the public version, but it would be a little stripped down. You might have fewer customization choices in terms of the template or the look and feel, the fonts, the colors, things like that. But it's probably negligible. Not so much that you'd want to shell out the money for an account if your institution doesn't pay for it.
Yeah, because I'm tasked to set up a digital humanities lab at UC Santa Cruz. So I'm looking at these different software tools, and I saw ArcGIS, but it's quite expensive.
Yeah. I would check with your geography department, because our geography department here maintains the site license for ArcGIS for everybody, and everybody now has access with the institutional account. It used to be a lot harder to get access to it, but in the last couple of years, they've expanded access. And I would imagine that most research institutions, such as your own, probably someone at your institution has already figured that out.
Oh, okay. So it can be shared to the whole campus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So for us, we log in using our SDSU credentials.
Yeah.
And then ArcGIS is also installed on our public computers as well.
Oh, okay. I thought I would buy, I mean, if I install it as an individual account, like only on a few computers, like if I pay for $500 for a year as license fee, it can be downloaded only to one computer. Or...
Yeah, why don't I suggest, let me stop the recording. Okay. I do want to answer this one question in chat, and then we can keep chatting about ArcGIS.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone who joined us. I'm going to stop the recording, but I will keep the Zoom going. So I hope you all have a wonderful and safe weekend.